I first saw him when I was 18. That summer, my family gathered at my grandmother's house, like we always did. A tradition. A place filled with memories. But that year, something changed. He was 2 years older than me, tall, confident, carrying himself with an ease that set him apart. The kind of ease that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Technically, we were third cousins. But in reality, strangers. His family lived in another city, and my parents weren't particularly close to his father. And yet, that summer, fate put us under the same roof. At first, he seemed distant. Like he wasn't quite sure what to make of me. I wasn't sure either. But little by little, the ice between us melted. We wandered the countryside, rode bikes through sunlit trails, sat by the river, talking about everything: music, books, dreams about the future. And for some reason, being with him felt easy, like I had known him forever. One evening, after everyone else had gone inside, we stayed by the fire. The flames flickered, shadows danced across his face. His voice, deep and steady, carried through the quiet night. He told me about his plan to join the military, not just as a duty, as a calling. I listened, and for a moment I felt something strange. A warmth spreading through my chest, a feeling I couldn't quite name. Then summer ended. He left to prepare for service. I left for college. The last thing he said before we parted, "Take care of yourself. We'll see each other again." At the time, I didn't know how much those words would mean. But I was about to find out. I thought he would fade into my past. A warm memory. A fleeting moment, softened by time. But I was wrong, because he didn't disappear. At first, it was letters. Real ones. Handwritten. I slowly learned to recognize his script, sharp, confident, just like him. They arrived without a pattern. Some short, some long, but each one felt like a window into his world. His words made the distance between us feel smaller, almost non-existent. When I read them, I could hear his voice. See that easy smile. Remember the warmth of that summer night by the fire. Meanwhile, my life was changing. I had moved to the city, loud, chaotic, nothing like the quiet town I grew up in. College consumed me. New friends, sleepless nights, endless lectures. And yet, in the middle of all that noise, I missed him. On weekends, I sometimes visited his father. A big house on the outskirts of town, warm tea, long conversations. And always, at some point, the topic would turn to him. His father would tell me about his new life, military training, barracks, the struggles, the victories. I soaked up every word. I wanted to know everything, even the smallest details. Then one evening, as we talked, his father did something unexpected. He pulled out a slip of paper, a phone number, the military unit where my cousin was stationed. He placed it in my hand, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Call him." My heart pounded. My fingers trembled. But I dialed. The line clicked. A moment of silence. And then, a familiar voice. "Hey, it's me." I felt a wave of relief, like I had been holding my breath for months without realizing it. "Is it really you?" I whispered. "God, it's so good to hear you." And in his voice, I heard it too. Something real. Something unguarded. Something I wasn't ready to name. For a few minutes, it was as if the miles between us didn't exist. He told me about the brutal routines, the sleepless nights, the camaraderie. I told him about my studies, my new life, my longing for the simplicity of summer. The call ended the same way our summer had. "Take care of yourself. We'll talk again soon." After that, we went back to letters. At first, they were sporadic, then longer, more personal. We shared our fears, our hopes, our secrets. And with every letter, one thing became clear: he wasn't just a memory anymore. But then, something changed. The letters came less often. And even when they did, his usual words, "Don't worry," felt different. He was holding something back. And deep inside, I knew something had happened. something that could change everything. For years past, life moved forward, like it always does. And if it weren't for an unexpected tragedy, maybe we would have stayed that way, occasionally exchanging messages, slowly fading from each other's lives. But then, his father passed away. He came home for the funeral, and I knew I had to be there too. Seeing him again after all these years was surreal. He looked the same, tall, reserved, still carrying that effortless confidence. But his eyes? They were different. Tired. Heavy. Like he had seen too much. We barely spoke. But our eyes met more often than they needed to. After the funeral, I stayed a few extra days. Helping. Making calls. Sorting through papers. Grief has a way of making everything feel fragile. And in those quiet moments, between the silence and the weight of loss, something between us shifted. One evening, as the dust settled, he told me something unexpected. I'm staying. His military contract was almost up, and he had no intention of renewing it. He said it like a fact, like a decision already made. But I saw the storm behind his eyes. Losing his father, leaving the structure of the military, facing a future without a plan. It was all hitting him at once. I didn't know how to comfort him, but I knew this. We weren't just cousins who had grown close by chance anymore. Now, we were something more. We kept writing, but this time, the things we had left unsaid started slipping into our conversations. When he finally returned for good, he moved into his father's house, took a job at a financial firm, tried to adjust to civilian life. No rigid schedules, no orders, no clear mission. For the first time in years, he was lost. And I kept visiting. Evening walks, coffee in small cafes, just the two of us. But there was something unspoken between us, something neither of us could quite reach for or let go of. Then, one night, I stayed over. His older brother had gone out with his girlfriend. The house was quiet, just us, a bottle of wine, laughter that lingered a little too long. Then, silence. A comfortable kind, the kind that makes you forget where the lines are. I lay on the couch. He stretched out on the floor beside me. The lights were off. We kept talking in the dark. I don't remember what we said. Just the silence. Just the sound of his breathing, steady and near. Just my own hand, reaching for him before I even realized it. Come lie next to me. The words slipped out. Soft, barely above a whisper. He moved without hesitation. And suddenly, he was close. Closer than he had ever been. I took his hand, placed it on my stomach. His fingers traced slow, deliberate circles against my skin. Careful, searching, like he was memorizing every inch of me. And in that moment, I knew, if we crossed this line, there would be no turning back. But the real question was, had we already crossed it long ago, without ever saying it out loud? I didn't have the answer. I only knew one thing. By the time the night was over, something between us would be decided. Forever. After that night, everything changed. Our meetings became more frequent. Not accidental. Not spontaneous. Intentional. We started looking for excuses. To see each other. To stretch time. To steal just a few more hours. Time itself felt different. Compressed into fleeting, electric moments when we were together. Stretched into an agonizing eternity when we were apart. We were drawn to each other. Like two halves of something that had been separated long ago. Now pulled back together by a force neither of us could resist. A force neither of us wanted to resist. At first, we told ourselves it was harmless. Just familiarity. Just comfort. Just a lingering closeness from the past. But we weren't fooling anyone. Especially not ourselves. Sometimes I caught our reflection in windows, in mirrors. The way we stood too close. The way our eyes lingered a second too long. And sometimes, I wondered if others noticed. His older brother gave us strange looks. And one day, our grandmother, in that knowing, casual way of hers, said something I'll never forget. You two seem to get along differently. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The pull between us was too strong. Days blurred into nights. And in those nights, we burned. Through time, through reason, through every unspoken rule. But even in our wildest moments, that quiet voice in the back of my mind never fully disappeared. A whisper, a warning, reminding me of boundaries, of reality, of the fact that stories like ours never end well. But we ignored it. We both did, because we were too lost in each other to care. When you spend too much time in a world built on feelings, sooner or later, reality finds a way to tear it down. One night, I decided to go out. A club. Music so loud it shook my chest. Flashing lights. Laughter. Strangers. For a few hours, I let myself forget everything. We danced. We drank. We flirted. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about him. But when I got home, his message was waiting for me. Had a good time? Just 4 words. But something about them felt off. Cold. Distant. I stared at the screen for a long time. I wanted to pretend it was nothing. Just a casual question. But I knew better. There was something underneath those words. Something sharp. Something bitter. We had never talked about jealousy. Never laid out rules. Never made promises. But in that moment, I could feel it. His resentment. His disapproval. His silent claim on me. And the worst part? I felt it too. The quiet, twisting jealousy inside me. Because around the same time, there was someone new. A woman at his office. Sharp. Confident. Beautiful. At first, he only mentioned her in passing. Then, more often. Then, too often. I laughed it off. Pretended it didn't bother me. Pretended I didn't check his social media. Looking for her name. Her likes. Any sign that he was slipping away. But the truth? There was now a wall between us. We didn't talk like we used to. Didn't look at each other the same way. Now, every glance carried an unspoken question. And neither of us wanted to ask it. The irony? We were both jealous. But neither of us had the right to be. He hated my late nights out. The way I laughed too loudly at other men's jokes. The way I pretended not to care. And I hated the ease in his voice when he talked about her. The way he seemed so detached, cool, like I didn't matter anymore. And after every moment of tension, every passive-aggressive remark, every barely contained fight, we'd end up in bed again. Our passion burned hotter, fueled by everything we weren't saying, by all the words we swallowed, by all the emotions we refused to acknowledge. When we were alone, everything made sense. All the frustration, all the jealousy, all the uncertainty. It all crashed over us like a tidal wave. Desperate, needing, unstoppable. We forgot everything. Rules, consequences, the lines we were never supposed to cross. Because in those moments, nothing about us felt wrong. It just felt inevitable. But when the morning came, everything reset. Back to reality. Back to the distance. We both knew we were caught in something dangerous. Something we couldn't name. Something we weren't ready to let go of. But deep down, I already knew. One day this would end. One day, one of us would finally say it. Enough. Time moved forward. Relentless. Unstoppable. And we tried to hold on. To the past. To the feelings. To the connection that had kept us tangled for so long. But the world was changing. And so were we. I finished school. Packed my bags. Left for the capital. A new life waited for me. A job. New people. New distractions. The city pulled me into its rhythm. Fast. Unforgiving. A blur of ambition and movement. And he stayed behind. At first, we tried to stay in touch, tried to pretend nothing had changed. Messages, late night calls. But with every passing day, the spaces between them grew longer. The words became fewer. And then, at some point, they just stopped. No dramatic ending. No final goodbye. No accusations. Just silence. It happened quietly, like grains of sand slipping through an hourglass. And suddenly, it was over. Years passed. And now, we each had our own lives. A family, children, the rhythm of the everyday. And I was happy, truly happy. Maybe he was too. But somewhere, deep inside, there would always be a secret. A quiet, untold story. One that belonged only to us. Years later, at a family gathering, our eyes met. Just for a second. Just by accident. He looked older, but his eyes? Still the same. Still deep. Still knowing. For a brief moment, time stood still. Not just curiosity. Not just nostalgia. Recognition. A silent understanding that what we had was never just a fleeting romance. But we no longer belonged to each other. I smiled. Just slightly. And so did he. Then he turned away. And life resumed its course. No one will ever know. And maybe that's for the best. Because some stories are meant to remain a secret. Because some love stories aren't meant to have a second chapter. And yet, sometimes in the quietest moments, when the noise of life fades away, a memory slips through. Soft, familiar, a reminder that once, for a brief, impossible moment, we were everything. I watched my husband reading by the window, listened to my children laughing in the next room, and I know, this is where I'm meant to be. This is my life. And yet, in the deepest corners of my heart, where even time cannot erase its traces, he still exists. Not as a regret, not as a longing, but as a whisper. A whisper of something that once burned so brightly, and then quietly faded into the past. If this story touched you, if it made you remember something or feel something, let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, hit like, subscribe, because sometimes the past whispers. And sometimes, if we listen closely, it leads us to stories yet to be told.